Please welcome Barton Seaver. Barton Seaver is one of the world's leading sustainable seafood experts and educators. Before leaving the restaurant industry to pursue his interest in sustainable food systems, he was an award-winning chef leading top seafood restaurants in Washington, D.C. After traveling the world with the National Geographic Society, he translated his experiences into leadership in the area of sustainable seafood innovations. As a member of the United States Culinary Ambassador Corps, Barton facilitates international conversations on sustainability and the role of food in resource management and public health. As the director of the Sustainable Seafood and Health Initiative at the Harvard School of Public Health, Barton led initiatives to inform consumers and institutions about how our choices for diet and menus can promote healthier people, resilient ecosystems, and more secure food supplies and thriving communities. He also served as senior advisor in sustainable seafood innovations at the University of New England and as sustainability fellow at the New England Aquarium. An internationally recognized speaker, Barton has delivered lectures, seminars, and demos to a multitude of audiences. He's written 7 seafood-centric books, including For Cod and Country, Two If by Sea, American Seafood, and The Joy of Seafood. Seaver has contributed to Coastal Living, The Coastal Table, Cooking Light, Every Day with Rachel Ray, Fine Cooking, Fortune, Martha Stewart's Whole Living, The New York Times, The Oprah Magazine, Savior, The Washington Post, among many others. He's also appeared on 60 Minutes, CNN, NPR, 2020, and the TED Stage. And for more information, you can visit his website, bartonseaver.com. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our second speaker, Barton Seaver.
Well, hi, everyone. Wow, thank you, Kirby. I really appreciate that intro. I'm going to do a little bit of business here because I'm joining you from the ragged, jagged, delicious coast of Maine, where things like lumberjacks exist on one street, and sometimes they drop a tree onto the power lines, which is what happened about 25 minutes ago. So I am now coming to you via my computer or via a hotspot on my phone. So Tania, Kirby, am I coming through clearly?
Yes.
Okay. If I am not at any point, would you please just flag me and I will try and log back on, and perhaps maybe Bree could stand in or answer a few questions until I come back. So I apologize for that, but hey, this is Maine, right? It's one of the reasons why we live here. One of the other reasons why we live here is because of people like Bree, quite honestly. And well, you know, in all of this conversation that we're having today, what Bree has already mentioned, the incredible work of Fine, and all of you who are joining as attendees today, know that sustainability gets very complicated very quickly. The ideas of it, the metrics of it, just the numbers of it, the data, the culture of it, it's hard. But ultimately, at the end of the day, sustainability as an action is really very simple, and that's that of being a good neighbor, right? If we're looking out for someone else, then we are participating in the pious chain that links us to everyone else. And so the fact that I am been invited to be here to help support and add what I can to the work of Bree, to the work of all of you attending is incredible. And I hope you see that as my contribution, just as being a good neighbor. Also, I just want to call out Bree because, well, because she's badass. That's why. You know, entrepreneurship, which has been tested in COVID, unlike any time within recent history, has proven that entrepreneurship is the backbone of sustainability. It is the backbone of our communities, and that entrepreneurship really equals heroism. And so, to Bree specifically, but to all of you, you know, keep on, because the backbone of entrepreneurship is endurance. So anyway, with that. My name is Barton Seaver. Hi, everyone. Hey, that's great. Yeah, sunny day here in Maine. This is wonderful. I'm going to talk about, well, a couple of things. First and foremost, though, I'm going to do a little demo, just talk about seaweed on the plate, right? Because I'm a chef, or I was a chef. I'm a recovering chef at this point, I would say. But just a little bit about that. And then I'm going to get into sort of why seafood matters, just to set some context for what else happens here today. Oh boy, Tania, you just changed the screen. I can see my hair, which I described as Maury Sendak was asked to draw a demented artichoke, but hey, COVID, here we go. Okay, so I'm going to do a very quick demo for you and then talk about social license, talk about why seafood matters. And well, the things that Bree had mentioned, she does some incredible work around the value add products, which are great because, hey, that adds further jobs here in Maine. It's one thing to catch a fish, to farm some kelp. It's another thing to take that fish's head off, to fillet that fish, to then further process the kelp. That's just added layers of job, added layers of economic impact that we in Maine here desperately need, but that you have the opportunity to help support. Angus King, our senator, famously said, no fish should ever leave Maine with its head on. And that's something that I really like that Bree is doing here with her sea chi, the sea beet kraut, her seaweed salad, etc. Using kelp and finding us where we are as consumers, not asking us to necessarily make the leap into the deep, into the unknown, but finding us where we are with these products. The other products that she does, and I'm just going to talk about sea greens today, although there's so much to talk about seafood in general, which is why I've written so many books. So hey, Sustain the Sustainers, check out my books. Hey, everybody. The kelp, one of the things that I like to talk about with kelp is that it might seem on the surface as though the price point is a little high. You look at it and I think right now at Harbor Fish here in Portland, Maine, a pound of kelp is like $15, $16, something in there. And that might seem high. However, if you go to the farmer's market and you buy a pound of arugula or a pound of spinach, what does it cost you? $12, $15, right? And it's worth the money. What happens when you cook down a big pound of spinach, right? Hey, enjoy some spinach. There you go. What happens when you cook down the pound of kelp? Nothing. It just stays delicious in and of itself. So your yield on kelp is 100% once you get it home, once you get it, into your recipe, into your ingredients. So just as a sort of cultural thing, though the food might seem expensive, it's not, because it delivers on so much value. And in terms of the utilization of kelp, these are scissors, by the way. Scissors, cut across the top, dump it out. There you go. Hey. And what I did today for this demo is I dumped it out into a blender, a handy dandy little blender that I have over here, with some pecans, nice sweetness to it, which matches the kelp perfectly. It draws out some of its more elegant, ebullient, aromatic qualities to it, sort of the floralness. And it also really highlights the greenness of it in the way that pesto does. If you think about a basil pesto, what is the most overwhelming flavor of it? It's like aromatically green and summery, right? Well, kelp the same, when paired with just a little bit of sweetness, does that. So kelp pecans, kelp walnut, kelp cashew, etc. So this is just pureed, a little bit of garlic, some olive oil. You want a nice fruity olive oil, like those spicy Sicilian or sort of Tuscan olive oils that get you here, like those old A1 ads. Those can be a little tough on seaweed. It's just not the greatest pairing. It sort of draws out some of the more tannic aspects of it. But here's this kelp. And why is it in this little bag? Well, because I take a pound of kelp and I throw it in there and I make about 10 of these little baggies of pesto that I take out. And what do I do with them? Well, look at this. And by the way, this pan was very hot, so I'm going to put it down. That was linguine cooked with sweet potatoes, just diced up. And there you go. And I put the sweet potatoes in with linguine about the same time. And that's why I use linguine for this, because it cooks at the same rate as does the sweet potato. And so while this is hot, you want to keep a little bit of the pasta cooking water in there, which I can't show you because of gravity and the angle of the camera here. But then, hey, there you go. There's your recipe. All right, folks. And then you stir that up using whatever it is. That cooking water that's left in there adds to the, well, it sort of adds a little bit of starch, that pasta flavor to it, but it also helps to sort of lengthen the flavor of the kelp. It helps it to spread evenly over. And, well, how about I put this into By the way, this is what happens when you've been asked to do a culinary demo and then your internet goes out because of lumberjacks because you live in Maine. All right. So there you go. Delicious, beautiful pasta. If it was on a plate, it would look even better. But all this incredible nutrition, incredible sustenance to it, etc. So there you go. Kelp, easy to use, right? It's not a deep dive into the unknown. It's a deep dive into delicious. All right, so there you go. That's my contribution on the culinary side. Bree is texting me. I wonder what she's saying. Bree, you're messing with my broadband here.
Sorry, I think this is amazing, and I love it.
Stop texting me. All right, so what I'm going to talk about now is that aspect of social license, about why seafood matters. And I'm going to take a deep dive into some history on this. And hopefully what I'm going to do is set up Kate Masury, who's joining us next, whose work I admire so very much, as well as to sort of answer some of the questions that I know some of you have sent in prior, is sort of about what are some of the obstacles, the roadblocks to implementing further kelp aquaculture, but aquaculture in general. And that's the idea of social license, which is defined as the values that we apply to an industry when we understand the benefits it brings to society, to culture, to economy, to regions. And that's something that I will argue in general is lacking for seafood across the board, whether you're talking about cod or whether you're talking farmed salmon or whether you're talking about kelp. So with that, I'm going to be talking about both wild and farmed, making my case as to why they should both exist, as well as talking about some of the challenges there. And really also talking about what we can do as consumers to support. So a little bit about my history, just about how I've gotten to you, to the ragged, jagged, delicious coast of Maine. I was born and raised in Washington, D.C. in a very multi-ethnic neighborhood called Mount Pleasant, which was mostly Eritrean, Ethiopian, Guatemalan, Honduran, and El Salvadorian immigrants at the time. And a lot of those people had fled civil unrest in their countries. And when you are fleeing unrest, you bring with you the most beautiful things of your culture. And as part of their new emergence in America, that was put on display so vividly, so personally, so emotionally, in that food was the way that they expressed themselves. The little bodegas, which serviced their needs, and brought with them a flavor of the entire globe, bringing with it a physical example of flavors from across the world. And that idea of culture and of physical exploration through food, well, it set me on my path to understanding how we participate as consumers in this very massive, large chain that connects all of us, which is called dinner. Now, I first did that through restaurants as a chef. I had the opportunity to really dive deeply into sustainability, both of the products that I serve, but also of the people. I worked for Jose Andres, a chef in the news, deservedly so, a lot recently, even nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize because of his work around World Central Kitchen. Please check them out. But that idea of that deep humanity that is shared through food sat with me well. I had opportunity to become an explorer for National Geographic, where I went out into the world as a white man, thinking I had all the answers, right? I mean, our purpose was to, well, listen to me and reduce our impact on marine ecosystems. And I wised up very quickly. In fact, the purpose of sustainability and the purpose of anyone engaging in culture is to listen and to help maximize the positive outcomes through our work. And I began to understand that sustainability is not about minimizing impacts on marine ecosystems, but so much as, well, utilizing our skills and economies to maximize the impact marine ecosystems have on us. That the measure of sustainability is the endurance of thriving humans. And that's led me to my mission, which is to get more people across all demographics to eat more seafood. Why? Well, for a number of reasons. The first being economic. Bree spoke to that very elegantly, and Kate, I know, will speak to that as well. But the bottom line is, well, in rural coastal communities, seafood really matters. It is the opportunity for us to participate in our legacies. It is the opportunity for a daughter to follow in 7 generations of bootsteps, to take helm of that lobster boat, just as her great-great-great-great-granddaddy did. I mean, this is our ability to stay in place and to thrive. Plus, when you look at fisheries globally, 50% of participants in fisheries are women. 1 in 11 people globally, their livelihood is fully dependent upon seafood. I mean, that's incredible outsized economic impact in terms of the overall percentage of production that seafood represents. It's about 2% of calories consumed and produced globally are seafood, and yet 1 in 11 people globally's livelihood is fully dependent upon fisheries and aquaculture. That's huge in terms of its impact. So with that, also with aquaculture, over 70% plus of participants in aquaculture globally are women. And so if you want to look at investing in communities and, well, the endurance of thriving humans, invest in women, of course. And so there's this opportunity to look at aquaculture specifically and fisheries sustainability as a tool to help achieve those parities and equities. That is a very complicated statement. There's a huge amount to unpack there, but on the surface, that has always expounded upon, sort of provided a reason for me to pursue this. From an environmental standpoint, we should be eating more seafood as a center of the plate protein. We need to be eating mostly plants, greens, pulses, vegetables, legumes. Yes, I mean, that's it. Humans should be eating plants, right? But we should also be eating animal proteins and sea vegetables. And if we do so, we should look to the ocean as well. Well, we should look at sustainable seafood maybe as in context of other choices that we make, right? What are those choices? Beef, pork, chicken, lamb, veal, turkey in this country. And when you look at the environmental impacts across 5 important metrics: land use alterations, freshwater use, antibiotic use, feed conversion ratio, and wow, there's my pinky, greenhouse gas emissions. When you look at all animal proteins across the board, seafood has a fin up in the sustainability game. Why? Because you and me and pigs and cows and chickens are fighting atmospheric pressure and gravity, and we're spending a lot of energy to keep our blood warm. And we live in a really pretty severe environment when it comes down to it. And fish, nah, dude, that's cool. I float. That's what they do. They live in a buoyant natural environment. The stresses on them are a lot less. They're just more environmentally, well, biologically efficient. And in that way, across all of those 5 important metrics, seafood comes out on top. Now, that's not to say that we should give all seafood a pass and call it all sustainable. No, not at all. However, categorically look at seafood. And when it comes to health, the third reason I want more people eating more seafood is simply because, well, the American diet is killing us. And an over-reliance upon meat in our diet is a principal cause of that. And when you look at one of the principal opportunities we have to improve our health, well, increased consumption of seafood in this February, Black History Month, but also National Heart Health Month, we look at the opportunity to ingest more sustainable omega-3 fatty acids. Can help reduce overall mortality incidence by 17%, cardiac mortality incidences by 36%. And if you extrapolate that out, it's 55,000 American lives saved every year simply by doing what our own government recommends, eating seafood twice a week. There you go, folks. Eating seafood is so important to your health. My colleague, Dr. Dariush Mozaffarian, the dean of the Tufts School of Nutrition there, says that the 3 S's of public health: wear your seatbelt, don't smoke, eat seafood. It's that important. All right, so that's why I want more people eating more seafood. What are the blocks? What are the obstacles in order to achieve that? Well, I want to dive into a brief history of seafood. In this country, well, this country it was founded upon the backs of cod and the men and women that fished them. That is why these shores were discovered by the white settlers. It was one of the founding economies upon which we took our first steps towards economic and political freedoms. The outsized importance of cod and of fisheries cannot be overstated in this nation. However, seafood has long been seen as sort of a lesser protein. And if you look at the writings of William Bradford, the first governor of Plymouth Colony, in some of his many plaintive letters that he sent home back to the motherland of UK, well, he said when receiving the second boat of settlers, he said, the very best we could provide them with was a lobster or fair piece of fish. Oh, for shame that all he could give them was a giant fillet of striped bass coming from a 60-inch fish and delicious lobsters that just washed up on shore. For shame, right? Well, there was a religious and long-held sort of stigma, bias against seafood. If you look at the religious calendar, there's over 150 fast days in which the masses were told not to eat fish. Holy mackerel, well, because it was the food of the masses that they were meant to eat on those fast days. So there was this idea that fish was always a form of sacrifice in the founding sort of religious context of communities. And then once these small localized fisheries met railroads, well, what happened was meat all of a sudden became very affordable. And if you look at census data from consumption data from the first year that it's available in America in 1911, what we see is that meat at that point, we were already eating over 100 pounds of beef, pork, chicken, lamb, and veal, and turkey every year in this country, and we were eating only 11 pounds of seafood per person per year. And so there's always been this disparity of it, but though this country was founded upon the tempestuous waves of the North Atlantic, we turned our attention towards another ocean, one that rippled with amber waves of grain, and we became an agrarian nation. And that's long been part of our heritage, our history. If you look at the writings of that flawed man, Thomas Jefferson, that agrarianism, that land ownership is the surest form of political and economic prosperity and stability. We moved away from our maritime beginnings, and seafood has always gone with that. And there's another quote from Bradford that sort of sums this up. And though it's at the very founding of our history, I believe it's important that it informs where we are now. And that is, if God provide thee fish and a cup of fair spring water, then rest ye while contented, for God will soon provide thee better fare. And thus seafood has always sort of lacked that pizzazz, that the idea that it is our aspirational food. And that serves to sort of overstate the social license or lack of that fisheries and farms now have. And so with that, I want to talk about, I'm going to share our screen here, and this is where things might get complicated, but I want to start diving into fisheries. Let's see. How do I do this? And Tania or Kirby, just dive in, if you will, and tell me, because I won't be able to see it. Tell me if I'm not coming across properly here.
We can see it.
Right. Okay, awesome. Drink some water. Hi, everybody. I've delivered a lot already because I really like this topic, and I really like you. We are fellow folks in sustainability and delicious food. All right. So when we think about a fishery, what do we think of? We think of small, beautiful places like this, like Mackerel Cove here in Maine. But we also begin to think about, well, what we eat. And I want to take you on a little tour of that. But keep this image in mind, because this is really sort of the purpose of this talk, is that idea of social license and how we relate to this community in front of you. So when we fish, I like this old photo and old picture, and it's not about the picture, it's about what it represents here. Because it represents what an ocean ecosystem looks like, right? But in America, what our consumption looks like is this. We have 16 pounds, give or take, per person per year of seafood, which is well below about the 24, 25 pounds that our government recommends. But of that 16 pounds, 95% is only 10 species. Shrimp, salmon, and canned tuna representing 65% of our total consumption just there alone. And if you look at the rest of it, tilapia, pollock, pangasius, cod, catfish, what are those? They're all flaky white flesh fish, folks. They're pretty much the same species when it comes to our recipes. But let's go back to what the ocean looks like. Now, unfortunately, yeah, there's a seal in there and some crabs. There's a terrapin on the bottom, some endangered species, some sturgeon. Yeah, that's not the point of what I'm trying to show you. What I'm trying to show you is that when you drag a net through the water, what comes up with it? Well, cod, right? Yeah. But what else comes up in it? Well, pollock and haddock and plaice and cusk and ling and monk and skate and wolf and dog and eel and ray and pout and plaice and dabs and witchbacks and flounders and all that stuff. And when you go to the market, what else do you find? You find pangasius, bah, tross, why? I mean, there's so many different species, and when it comes down to it, what are they? They're all flaky white flesh fish, folks. That's what they are. But we don't ever give them a chance. Why? Because this is all we eat. And a part of that is just massive scales of globalized fisheries and the economics of this. Yes, absolutely. But it's some of it that we as consumers have told the oceans only what we're willing to eat, rather than asking of them what they are able to supply. Yeah. And in doing so, what we've created is an irrational economy based on demand rather than on supply. And that has proven that over the centuries just not to work. And for the communities at stake here and the stakeholders, as Kate will talk about, the opportunity for economics and environmental sustainability inherent in diversifying is incredible. And diversity is, in fact, the foundation of sustainability. Whether you're talking about your retirement portfolio, don't invest in one stock unless it's, of course, Zoom, at which point, good for you, you can retire now. But diversity is the foundation of sustainability, whether it's biological, whether it's economic, whether it is cultural. Nothing endures in a monolithic state. That's it, right? So if we want to sustain wild fisheries, we simply have to participate in an economy of supply rather than of demand. Oh, and by the way, when you do so, what happens? Well, the fish that's abundant and fresh and running right now in season is what's going to show up on your plate. And what's that going to be? Well, from a chef's perspective, better. Just more delicious, right? And isn't that a principal ingredient in any great recipe? It's deliciousness, right? So by opening ourselves up to diversity, we in fact win across the board. Not only do we act as good neighbors, we serve our neighbors better food. All right. So with that, I want to talk about the need for aquaculture. Now, there's been a lot of talk between, bycatch is the other thing. When you look at going back to fisheries, when we don't serve those fish, what happens to them? Well, they go overboard, dead, dying, wasted, unused for the purpose of ever feeding a human body, and yet that cost is placed upon the ocean ecosystems, and yet we never derive any benefit from it. And when we look at that, that's just a huge economic opportunity lost, but also just a moral issue, right? I mean, we shouldn't take what we cannot use. And a big part of that also is portion size. Don't eat more than you need. You only need 4 ounces of animal protein at any given time, right? So if you go eat that 12-ounce steak, that 16-ounce steak, that giant 32-ounce tomahawk ribeye steak, which is delicious and fulfills that Flintstonian desire in all of us, yes, but you literally are going to poop out most of it, unwasted, unused for the purpose of sustaining the body, because more than you need is exactly that, more than you need. So don't piss away the oceans, right? Just eat what you need. There you go. So I want to talk about the need for aquaculture. Now, a colleague of mine, Dr. Cynthia Jones in Virginia Tech, she and I sat on a panel at the Institute of Medicine and about ecosystem service. And she did a calculation that if we were to eat every single pound of product that we capture in wild fisheries here in this country, and that includes menhaden and capelin and Atka mackerel and things that we don't eat. If we were to eat everything that we capture in America, we produce only 60% of what our own government recommends that our population eats. Globally, with demand for seafood expected to triple, through rising population as well as expanding, increasing wealth. Well, bottom line is we need aquaculture. And that doesn't mean that all aquaculture in all forms belongs in all places. But the challenge here that we've seen is culturally, it's been a conversation of wild versus farmed. But that's not the actual challenge. The actual challenge is to increase consumption sustainably to meet economic, health, and environmental goals. And aquaculture and wild capture fisheries must be collaborative in that success. So, as you can see here in this slide, that wild capture fisheries, the orange there, has remained relatively static over the past several decades, around 90 million metric tons. Now, there's some argument, then, and rightly so, that that number needs to decrease. The World Bank says 5% every year over the next 10 years, a full reduction of about 50%. We listen to folks like Ray Hilborn and his incredible colleagues out at University of Washington, Jane Lubchenco, et cetera, incredible scientists. And they're saying that, well, oceans can sustain fisheries if done right under regimes like we have in America. So how do we get to aquaculture? Well, you can see there in the dark blue and the light blue that aquaculture production is increasing exponentially. And why? Well, aquaculture is a relatively new industry, right? The very first salmon net pen went into the water only about 55 years ago. Is it a technology we've had for thousands of years? Yes, but as a global commercialized technology and food system, we are witnessing its invention as we speak. The last time we got to invent a food system was 10,000 years ago when we planted the seeds of modern civilization in agriculture. We are doing that again, here and now, literally as we speak. So that's exciting, but it also means that this aquaculture is an industry that deserves some leeway in terms of, wow, yeah, we're trying to create ecosystems or create brand new technologies. Yeah, maybe what happened 25 years ago was abusive and in retrospect wrong, but wow, have we learned? And the increases in sustainability that we made have been exponential. And so to me, aquaculture is a really compelling ingredient in the global food system, not only because of its rapid growth, but because of the incredible potential and represented by so many of you here today in this call. So with that, I want to talk about the fact that I had a very, negative approach to aquaculture when I first got into sustainability. I was a farmed and dangerous flag carrying dude. That's what I did, right? Because all the abuses of that time were real. And yes, from a strictly metric approach, you could say that farmed salmon was unsustainable. However, 20 years on, some changes have been made, and now you could argue that it very much is sustainable, and other species even more so, especially kelp. But my journey towards this began in West Virginia, that great ocean state of West Virginia, where I found a company that was farming Arctic char up in the Blue Ridge Mountains, Blue Ridge Aquaculture. And though they had a high feed conversion ratio, and I think it was about 3.5 pounds of anchovies going in to get 1 pound of char, I looked at that and I said, yeah, but they're also employing 65 people in an area of the country that is incredibly destitute and overwhelmed with poverty. And wow, maybe this idea of loaves and fishes applies here, and that the overall impact of those 3.5 pounds of anchovies, if weighed in a cultural sense and an economic sense, maybe that's a pretty good feed conversion ratio because it fed 65 families, right? That began to change my mind in terms of how do we look at aquaculture. And my mind was blown when, the slide in front of you, I was on a train up in the mountains of Switzerland, that great ocean state of country of Switzerland, right, everybody? Yeah. I mean, I was literally in a Ricola ad. Ricola, right? I mean, up in the Swiss Alps, this was crazy. And I got past a little place called Interlaken into this little tiny hamlet where there's cows up on the hillside. And this was the site of one of the great engineering feats of the time, which was they were boring a tunnel through one of those giant mountains in order to connect two cantons. to states to promote intercanton trade as well as tourism. When they were doing so, they tapped into a geothermally heated spring, and the environment study said, well, you got to do something with that water. You can't just pass it off into this Ricola ad and think everything's going to endure, right? So there's this Romanian guy, I believe, who had this great idea. He's like, I'm in the Swiss Alps. Cool. I got some hot water. Hot meaning like 65 degrees, right? But that's hot for up there. I got some hot water. What should I do? I'm gonna build a greenhouse. I'm gonna build a greenhouse. You know what I'm gonna build in my greenhouse? I'm gonna grow bananas. Why bananas? Because why not, right? I mean, Switzerland, bananas. Everybody thought he was bananas, right? Because, well, it's kind of crazy. But it worked. He was growing bananas. And I think he supplied something like 40% of the banana consumption of Switzerland at some point. I mean, it's wild, out of a Ricola ad, right? Crazy. Well, he also had some hot water left over at the end of the day. So what did he do with it? Well, he put it in the giant tanks in order to cool it down or to pass it through the ecosystem, right? Well, in these tanks, he's like, what else can I grow? Well, I got bananas. What else do I need? I need caviar, of course. Little interlude here. As a chef, bananas and caviar, just don't do it. Okay, back to our regular scheduled programming. So now he's growing 60,000 head of Siberian sturgeon in these ponds, and he's just doing his thing, right? And wow, yeah, that's pretty cool. And now he's created all of these jobs. He's created all this economic opportunity. He opens 2 restaurants, a cafe, a museum, and through that tunnel, every year that was the source of this, quote, problem, what happens? 150,000 German tourists flow every year in order to see the banana man because he's banana crazy and he's serving caviar in this cafe. And wow, how cool is that? So I began to see recirculating aquaculture systems as this giant sort of avenue, opened my mind to better understanding the potential of aquaculture. And that made me look again at ocean-based systems. And when you look at what Brie is doing, good Lord, I mean, come on, it makes sense. It just makes sense. But then if you look at multi-trophic systems, and a lot of what's being done, the incredible work Green Wave is doing, other folks, you then begin to look at polytrophic systems the way that we look at them on land, on farms. If you've read Omnivore's Dilemma, you understand this. What Joel Salatin is doing. You understand that animals are a vital and important part of a land-based agrarian system, right? Well, what if we recreated that idea in the water and you had fish cages in which swim whatever? And at the bottom, you have sea cucumbers. And around that, you have scallops, you have mussels. And around that, you have this green halo curtain of kelp. All of a sudden, your ecosystem that you've created or sort of mimicked here at high capacity of production, now all of a sudden has a positive environmental impact. And when you begin to look at the social license of it, the civic and cultural values and economic values it's creating, whoa, wow, this is cool. And then if you look at some of the science that's coming out, like Dr. Haley Froelich out at University of California system, a brilliant scientist. She is badass. She's incredible. She came out with a paper about ocean hotspots. What's a hotspot? Well, Iowa, for example, is an agricultural hotspot. Central Valley of California, agricultural hotspot. It makes sense, of course, that the ocean is going to have hotspots. I mean, it's 99.9% of the livable space on this planet, right? So you can imagine that aquaculture in the San Marinas Trench is not a good idea at this point. But in Maine, yeah, it's a really good idea. Ocean hotspots, she factored that if we were to take these areas of the ocean that are best suited to aquaculture and sustainably and intensively farm in an area of them only the size of Michigan, that we could equal the production of global wild capture fisheries, 90 million metric tons in an area of the ocean, particularly suited to aquaculture, the size of Lake Michigan. Lake Michigan, as compared to the ocean, is 1/1000% of the ocean, right? And when you begin to look at that, you begin to look at communities along the coast of Maine, you say, oh my goodness, what are we doing here, folks? What we're doing is revolutionizing food systems. But what it's going to take, folks, is I want to get back to this picture, and I'll finish up here, is for us allow for it, to give it to and Gunnar Knapp. The biggest impediment and obstacle to increasing aquaculture production is that lack of social license. Now, I want all of you to close your eyes. I want you to picture the UMass Dartmouth corridor along the Pioneer Valley and the Quabbin. I want you to picture that small family farm in those undulating hills, bathed in autumn splendor setting sun. I want you to see the amber rippling of grain, of corn, as far as the eye can see, perfectly patterned, leading our eyes, our mind, our spirit, our hearts, our patriotic sensibility back to that red barn, color fading, white house, paint chipping, picket fence, the very thread by which the fabric of America has been woven. Are you there? Do you get it? Do you value that? Now I want you to open your eyes and picture yourself here in Mackerel Cove in Maine. And I want you to see a fishery as exactly that. And though we think as a fishery or a farm as the thing that happens beyond the horizon of our attentions, somewhere else, somewhere other, I want you to understand that a fishery, or that an aqua farm, a water farm, is in fact the houses and the roads and the opportunities for a daughter to follow in 7 generations of bootsteps. It is the quality of public education. It is the ability for a family to endure in a place, to access their legacy. A fish or a farm, a water farm, is us. It is what we value in our communities. And when we see it as such, we see ourselves reflected in it, and we can begin to see ourselves participating in it. If not as literal participants, then simply as participants on the plate. And it's that idea of social license. Now, if you go back to that vision in your head of that family farm off in the Connecticut River Valley, what's missing in that picture? Well, the primeval forest, the 80% of New England that was deforested in pioneer times. We think land cultured, beautified, improved because of our presence there. We call it agriculture, right? Improving upon land. We think land beautiful for our presence there. And yet we think of the ocean as beautiful for our absence. And that is what needs to change. We need to begin to look at scenes like this and say, understanding the sustainability of this kelp farm operation and understanding that this is as beautiful to our eyes and to our culture as is those undulating rows of corn in autumn splendor setting sun. We need to ascribe those values. We need to invest our money and invest our spirit in seeing ourselves and our future in such places. So with that, thanks. I really appreciate this opportunity to be here and to add what I can. You're all wonderful.
All right, Barton, I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to just have a few questions for you and Briana. Again, if anyone has any questions that they would like at this time, please drop it in the Q&A. So my first question is, when we support local fisheries or farms, does that promote healthy oceans? If so, how?
Great.
And Barton or Briana, if you want to answer that.
Sorry, could you repeat the question one more time?
Yeah. When we support local fisheries or farms, does that promote healthy oceans? If so, how?
So, I mean, I will say for oysters, I can only speak to oysters, kelp, and mussels. I don't have a lot of knowledge about finfish, and I think Barton could probably speak on that better than I can. But when you plant mussels, oysters, scallops, kelp in the water, you're actually making the environment better. You're removing carbon, you're removing all sorts of other things from the water and taking it out. filtering the water. And so every time you decide to eat kelp or any shellfish that is farmed, you are in fact making the environment better. And when you think about, what I always like hearing Barton talk about is the need for wild and farmed. And I think that is absolutely true. I think in the case of shellfish and kelp, there's actually a lot more benefit of having farmed. And the reason for that is because there's, there are some serious issues with wild seaweed right now, throughout the country, throughout the world, as climate change is really seeing a degradation of the natural stocks. In the state of California, for example, the kelp forests have diminished by some colossal percentage that I don't even want to cite because I could get the number wrong, but it's fairly dramatic. And kelp forests are some of the most diverse habitats in the planet. Similarly, oysters and mussels and clams and wild versions of them have diminished as well. And we need to kind of leave them where they are to do the job that we're doing. And when we do aquaculture of those sorts, what we're actually doing is adding to the ocean in a positive way.
Great. And then Briana, there's another question for you. What are the various markets for kelp, and how do institutional markets fit into the bigger picture?
We have this our tagline used to be never dried, never died. And we started actually just replacing that recently with kelp on everything. And I know that sounds silly, but the reality is that we have kelp, as I was saying earlier, we actually have no idea all the aspects of seaweed that can be out there. It can be, right now we know it works for food. We know that it's one of the most nutrient dense foods on the planet. And how institutions fit in that are, making sure it's introduced to consumers at that level, drives trial, drives exposure of the product. As anyone who eats in a cafeteria or works in a cafeteria in these schools know, you can actually put things in front of people that they'll try because it doesn't, it's not a big risk. If they don't like it, they won't eat it. It drives trial, it drives exposure. And institutions can be a really great form of that, but it also drives volume. For us in particular, or others, what you can serve at a dining hall is incredible amount of food. All of those, hormonal 22-year-olds that just eat so much. I still am shocked by how much I ate at that time, and I'm only 5'3". So, that's how institutions fit into that. But that, food is not the only market for it. We're now working with nutraceuticals, cosmetic companies. If you take a prenatal vitamin, it has kelp in it. It's usually imported and it usually has heavy metals. So let's switch it out with our kelp. Cosmetics, there's kelp in a bunch of different cosmetics already in the market. Multivitamins, all of these kind of things, there's already kelp in them. So let's switch them out. And then kind of the third area that we are constantly looking into is animal feed and fertilizers, because we know, as per some of the carbon sequestration questions that I answered earlier by writing them, we know the only way that we know that carbon is permanently sequestered after pulling it out of the ocean is when it is actually in the ground and buried like fertilizer, or when it's fed to cows, because it actually reduces the cow's methane emission if they eat kelp. Seaweed. There's also some really incredible evidence coming out of Poland, of all places, where if you feed fermented seaweed to pigs, it actually reduces their need substantially for antibiotics. So there's just so many uses for it. There are companies doing fabrics out of seaweed. There are companies doing, polymers. I mean, all sorts of things that I think the market is just starting. And right now we're focused on food and nutraceuticals, but there are a lot of opportunities beyond that.
Thank you. Barton, this question's for you. As someone who's worked to help institutions develop values-based sourcing, what is one of the major hurdles in this work, and what have you found successful in helping overcome them?
Hey, Bart, you're on mute.
Hey, Bree, I hope you're not driving, by the way, are you? Are you? Okay, cool. So, because I'll forget to mention this later, I actually did a lot of work around this with when during my tenure at Harvard there. Check out Sustainable Seafood on Campus, a white paper that I wrote with some colleagues around those issues, around seafood specifically, and some great work done with Ken Tung, UMass, and his incredible and generous invitation into to work with him. Ron DeSantis down at Yale, Smith Hanif down at Princeton, some really wonderful folks that are really the ones leading this charge, especially Ken Tung. He and his team are just incredible, as are all of you. So check that out, Sustainable Seafood on Campus. But the thing comes back to something that Bree was talking about earlier in her presentation, but also to the question she just answered, which is how do you sort of increase the culture of it? Well, with institutional dining, the very greatest asset that you have is the relationship that you formed with folks. I mean, you could call them captive audience, right? Because they're coming to you three times a day, but I prefer to call them a generated audience. I mean, you've developed this deep reciprocal relationship with them and feedback loops. Hi, wife. Nice to see you. She just walked in. You develop these deep reciprocal feedback loops, and well, you have the opportunity for them to try something. And well, as Bree said, there's not a whole lot of risk in that trialing it, because well, they can just go back up and get something else. But it's also that normalizing of it, just that idea that kelp sustainability is, well, it's there, it's normal. Instead of having to go to the restaurant as a one-time customer down in Boston and say, hey, would you please put Maine kelp on your menu? You've got this opportunity over years and years to develop that relationship. Is dogfish scary? Well, if all somebody has ever heard in their life is the word haddock, yes, it's scary, but it's also not, because hey, we eat lots of catfish in this country. What's wrong with dogfish, right? I mean, hey, there you go. So it's that normalizing aspect of it, I think, and it's that, hey, this is not just an experimental side of our menu, but this is the same thing we've always been doing. Yeah, you had your haddock baked in spiced tomato sauce served over brown rice pilaf, flecked with pecans and a little bit of fresh cilantro thrown in there, right? Wait, what was the fish? It doesn't matter. It could be hake or haddock or pollock or cusk or ling or monk or skate or wolf or dog or eel or ray or powder or place or dabs or flounder or witchbacks or dab. I mean, it doesn't matter. It's all flaky white flesh fish, folks. The key there is that the person recognizes exactly what that dish is going to taste like. It's fish baked in a spiced tomato sauce, served over a brown rice pilaf, flecked with pecans and a little bit of fresh cilantro, right? The fish doesn't matter. It's offering, sell the dish, not the fish. Sell the dish, not the kelp. Offer them that easy access to it. And if you need to, just put ketchup on it, because ketchup, and this is America. So
I mean, I love that. I love that. I think that's absolutely right, Barton. One thing that we always say to people with kelp is like, how about we don't, people are like, oh, I'm trying to work with this. And they come up with all these like incredibly complex recipes. And I'm like, just put it on a salad, coat it in sesame sauce, put it in a smoothie. Like it does not have to be, chefs can sometimes get ahead of themselves about how they want to just make this such a big deal. And what you said is absolutely right. Just throw it on a meal. That's it. And people will like it. It's the dish and it's the umami. I mean, kelp is umami, and it is green and it is crunchy, and that is what it adds, period. Right. So I think that's totally right. And also the reason I'm in my car is, like Barton said, we're in Maine, and you lose service and you lose Wi-Fi pretty quickly. And this is the only place I can get service right now. So I'm actually not driving. I just needed service.
All right, thanks. There's an anonymous question. Has there been any investigation of allergens present in seaweed or kelp for consumers with allergies that might otherwise prevent them from consuming more commonly thought of seafood, crustaceans, bivalves, fish, etc.? It might be an opportunity to market something more sustainable or healthy, to eat from the ocean for the first time, or to access the sea salty flavor they can no longer have.
I love that question. So I have two kids, and this does get to something. I have two little boys. They're 3 and 5. And everything I do in food safety and food production is, and I know Barton would feel the exact same way. He also has two little guys, but you know, what would I be willing to say and claim and be 100% behind to ensure my little guy's safety? Because that is what is going to eat our kelp and kelp cubes everywhere, right? Kelp cubes, kelp, whatever. So there is no proven allergen on kelp. Having said that, it does grow in the ocean. And I cannot 100% with 100% certainty say there is no little amount of residue from a shellfish somewhere on it. So we are not obligated by the FDA or anybody else to put an allergen warning on our products, because there are no allergens that the FDA recognizes on the products. We do put a statement on it that says kelp is a marine vegetable. The ocean is the ocean. So, you know, I think we're probably way overboard on that. But if my litmus test is, what if my child had a shellfish allergy? You know, would I feed kelp to them? Probably, but I would want to better understand it.
That's a very interesting question. So this is from Amanda Davis of Our Wicked Fish. She says, "Hi there, Barton and Briana. Thank you for all the work you do. My question is about changing behaviors. In your experience, what type of interventions like messages, influences, people, tools, stories, etc., often make purchasing decision makers want to reconnect with their local seafood options?"
So for us, you know, we have been very lucky in that we've had a lot of people in the industry excited about what we're doing. And so, you know, I don't know, you know, influences, I think people are influenced by one of 3 points that we bring to the table. One is either the social equity, you know, economic development side of things with Fisherman. They're either, or the climate change, or taste and nutrition. Obviously, I would love to get to the point where taste and nutrition leads, because it's harder for someone to actually take that next step if they're only interested in the social mission. I mean, they'll do it, and it'll take some time, but if they're interested in the taste, it'll be a lot faster. And our social mission benefits so much just from people buying it. I actually don't care if they understand how good it is for the planet. If they're eating it, they're doing good for the planet, and they're doing good for the coast of Maine. So those are the message that I find that people can kind of meet us on one of those 3 areas pretty well. It usually attracts people in one of those 3 areas, you know, and I kind of wane from day to day which ones I find the most compelling. But I think that's, if that answers your question. I don't know if Bart has some other ways that he might talk about it.
Great answer, Bri. So I've been eating some of the Suzie, some of Bri's Suzie here, and it's awesome. It's really delicious. It's good enough just to eat as it is. So the key to this, and I'll go back to my days in restaurants, which was in one of my restaurants, Hook. We served in my flagship. We served over 100 different species of seafood within the first 2 years we were open. About 100 in the first year. And we served some stuff that nobody had ever heard of, including myself. You know, how did I get it off the menu and onto the plates? Well, I engaged the staff, is what it is. And so, yeah, I could put bearded brotula on my menu, which, like, hey, quick, come up with a really disgusting fish name. Bearded brotula. Like, I mean, like this is about as bad as you can get, right? And yet I would sell out of it, because I had my service staff excited about it. And whether or not that was Libby, the server, getting really excited about the social aspect of it, or Andrea or Gianna getting really excited about just the, oh my God, it's so fresh, it just came in, like blah, 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 blah. Or whether it was Pablo saying, man, this stuff is really, Pablo, you know, like, he was always stoned, I think. He was like, man, this is really cool. I've never heard of it. It's great. You know, whatever it was the server that was selling it. And, you know, from the server standpoint, they made on average 24% tips. And this was back in 2006, 2007, when 18% was high tier, right? So what did I have in my restaurant? I had the very best servers in all of Washington, D.C. working for me. Why? because they were making money, a lot of money. I mean, 6 figures money. Why? Because I gave them a story to sell, and I gave them something that they could feel proud of being an active and necessary participant in. And so to all of you institutions, why does this matter? It's not enough, chef, to just put it on your menu. You got to get the line staff involved. Put it in family meal for a month ahead of time. Put it in your employee cafeterias. Send it home with your cooks. Get them engaged, because the person that is doing this on the line, if they're really excited about this thing instead of this thing, because you engaged them, that's going to sell it. It's not necessarily, it doesn't matter which story they're selling, so long as they're excited about telling it, right?
That Bart,
So
I think that is such a good point. When we just launched at Sprouts, which is 350 location natural grocery chain out west, and we sent a training video out the day it launched to every one of their management staff and buying staff, because I want someone to be able to walk in the store and say, like, oh, I'm putting something else in my smoothies, and them to know what it is. We're sending out coupons to staff because it's exactly to the point that Barton said. And I'm not out there demoing. I can't be out there demoing. None of my staff can. We can't demo, which is crazy hard to launch a retail product without demoing in the middle of a pandemic. So these guys and gals are the ones that are going to be leading it.
I think we'll go into that more during the panelists talk as well with the chefs when they talk about how they brought it into the institutions. But might be the last question or the second to last question. Briana and Barton, to what extent is seafood distribution providing challenges to your sales these days? And is distribution to consumers by mail growing as a distribution channel?
I can speak to the distributor side of things in that, we're not a seafood in the grocery store. And I find that to be a huge blessing, because if I'm in the seafood area, then who doesn't look in the seafood area is vegetarians and vegans. Who loves seaweed? Vegetarians and vegans, right? So I don't do work with seafood folks. Seafood distributors will call and be like, hey, what's your market price today? Can I get, I'm like, market price, it is always $5.50. It is always the same. And I still am not going to give it to you by text message. You need to send in a purchase order like every other distributor. So, we find the seafood world is not really the world that we live in. And I have so many colleagues in the aquaculture space that get orders by text, and it just makes my logistics mind explode. So, we really don't work with many seafood buyers. We have a few that like to pair it with things. We certainly work with seafood companies that are doing lobsters and want to pair it, but we do it on a CPG basis or a food service basis in a much more organized way. I think on the retail side, on the mail order side, one thing that's difficult for us is our products are refrigerated or frozen. So that does become a logistics issue. And when you're buying lobster, you don't mind spending $40 for shipping. When you buy kelp, you don't want to spend $40 for shipping. And then add into the fact that, first of all, we wouldn't use styrofoam because it's not the right thing to do. But also, if one of our customers got a styrofoam package, imagine that reaction. We're so good for the environment. Here's your styro, right? It has to come in eco packaging, which means it doesn't work, unfortunately, because the science isn't there yet for it, or the innovation's not there for it. So it has to get there in 2 days, and 2 day shipping to California is expensive. So while our e-commerce has gone up, it's never going to be a huge retail channel for us. A huge sales channel for us, just because of the logistics of the refrigeration and the freezing, and the fact that we're not Amazon. We can't send things out for free. We can't eat shipping costs.
Right, very true. All right, before we go into our break, Barton and Briana, is there anything that you'd like to add or say?
I just thank you guys so much for inviting me on this panel, and also having Bart here. Just this kind of conversation is so helpful to what we're trying to build, and having someone like Bart, who's just such a magnificent cook and such an amazing and inspiring personality, talking about this product, talking about what what we're building in aquaculture in general nationwide, and how it can connect to people's taste buds and their own nutrition is just such an honor. Every time I'm on a panel with him, I just get so excited about what we're doing. It reminds me that it's not all about fixing the dishwasher and fixing our blancher and trying to run 18-wheelers up a coast. Like there's, you know, just, it's really helpful to remember why we're doing it. And also just thank you guys for this initiative, and to the Kendall Foundation for talking about this idea, and just really appreciate it.
Well, thank you both, Barton and Briana. And if you want to stick around, we'll have some questions at the end. Barton, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I'll reiterate, not to chime in with the last word over Bri, but reiterate my respect for her, for her whole team, but also for all of you. You know, Bri said it's too easy to get caught up in logistics, in the dishwasher, in the you know, the Sunday morning texts of like, hey, you know, the sous chef got arrested, or hey chef, what's the number for 911? And you know, just the stuff that happens day to day. Like, I get it, but please, all of you understand that at the end of the day, you are among the most noble of all of us. You are those that feed people. Even if you're a scientist working on the bench, you know, doing lab work on seed development, you feed people. There is nothing more holy or important or meaningful than that. Feeding people is an act of love. The world needs more of that. So thanks for what you do.